The kingdom of Ether and the realm of Solmyra had been at odds for centuries. Skirmishes along their borders were common, but tonight was different. Under the thin veil of peace, a banquet had been arranged, a calculated truce to discuss trade, land, and influence. It was there, amid stiff diplomacy and guarded words, that Sir Selim first saw her. Princess Elira stood beneath the golden chandeliers like a vision etched from another world. Her smile was polite, distant. But her eyes, those storm-grey eyes, caught his, held them for a second longer than propriety allowed. He told himself it meant nothing. A glance. A flicker. But he felt it. And she did, too. Days later, he found a folded parchment tucked into his saddle strap, sealed with the royal emblem of Solmyra. It shouldn't have been there. He shouldn't have opened it. But he did. Inside, a short note in elegant script. "Do you always stare so openly, Sir Knight?" It made him laugh. And then it made him want more. What followed was a dangerous dance of letters, each one more daring than the last. They wrote in metaphors, hidden meanings buried in poetry. A flower meant yes. A dagger, no. They never signed their names. Still, they knew. The thrill of it pulled him in, pulled them both in deeper with every word. Honor and duty faded in the haze of imagined touches and whispered hopes. Selim knew the lines he was crossing. A knight's loyalty belonged to his banner. Elira belonged to no one but was promised to another. Her marriage was to seal an alliance with the northern province, a deal made when she was still a child. Yet she wrote as though her heart had chosen otherwise. Selim read her letters at night by firelight, his armor still dusty from patrol, and wondered what it would be like to touch her hand instead of her words. The danger was constant. The letters passed through a mute servant girl who never spoke and never questioned. But even silence has ears, and someone had begun to notice. Lord Malric, an older advisor with eyes that never blinked, had started to linger too long in corridors, his gaze sharp, his smile absent. Selim felt the pressure building. One wrong step, and everything would shatter. But the fire had already been lit. During a second banquet, hidden from the crowd by towering columns and ivy-draped archways, they finally met in silence. No words. Just the soft gasp of two people standing too close. He didn't kiss her. She didn't ask him to. But in that moment, everything was clear. They were past the point of return. When he returned to his quarters that night, a new letter awaited him. 3 words only, say when. Come. His hand trembled as he held the paper. He had no plan, no idea what came next. Only the certainty that love, real, reckless, forbidden love, had already claimed them both. The first time they met in secret, the garden was still damp from rain. Elira wore a cloak that hid her identity, but her voice gave her away. Selim stood motionless as she stepped into view, her presence more intoxicating than he'd imagined. Neither of them spoke at first. The weight of the moment needed no words. When they did speak, it was with restraint, but their eyes betrayed them. He offered her his knight's token, a polished stone etched with his family's crest. She pressed it to her chest and said nothing. That was enough. The meetings became frequent. Always brief, always risky. They touched fingers like it was the only contact allowed in the world. They whispered of escape, of a life far away from war and duty. Elira confessed that she often dreamed of mountains, places untouched by politics or arranged futures. Selim listened, memorizing the cadence of her voice, the way she hesitated before admitting anything too personal. But while the garden bloomed with secrets, reality crept in like frost. Selim was summoned by his commander. His promotion had come through, he was now to lead the campaign against Solmyra's outer provinces. Elira's homeland. The irony nearly made him laugh, but not in humor. He couldn't refuse the order without raising suspicion. His silence felt like betrayal, yet he told her nothing. Unaware, Elira smiled when she next saw him. She spoke of her upcoming birthday and a private celebration her father planned. But behind the pleasantries, she held back. She knew something Selim didn't. Her engagement had been accelerated. Within a week, she would be sent north to marry. It was signed and sealed. She hated the decision, resented the cage of royal blood. But she couldn't bring herself to say it out loud. Instead, she asked him if he believed in fate. He said no. She didn't argue. That night, she began a letter with a trembling hand. She didn't tell him everything. Just enough to hint, soon, I'll be far. But not by choice. If there's a time, it's now. She tucked it into the usual hiding spot. Her heart pounded with every step back to the castle. She expected him to understand. Selim read it under torchlight, exhaustion from a full day's ride weighing on his limbs. His mind raced. He felt something shifting, as if their entire fragile world was crumbling from beneath. He didn't know about the wedding. All he saw was ambiguity, half-truths. And after weeks of silence from her side, delays, missed letters, vague responses, he started to question everything. Was he being played? Was she using him for comfort until duty called? He'd staked his honor, his future, on a fantasy. The realization left a hollow in his chest. But he couldn't let go. Not yet. Not until he saw her again. And so he prepared to answer her call, not knowing that both of them were already running out of time. The letter never reached her hands. A messenger intercepted, interrogated, and quietly removed. Elira waited in vain at the old stone dock, her cloak drawn tight against the wind, eyes fixed on the path he was meant to take. Each moment passed like a slow unraveling. She clutched the token he'd given her, fingers numb from more than cold. She believed, even as the sun dipped low, even as the guards arrived to escort her. When they dragged her to the waiting ship, she didn't cry. Not then. But the silence of his absence tore more deeply than any shouted goodbye. Selim never made it to her. On his way through the woods, he was ambushed by men from his own camp. Lord Malric had suspected for weeks and finally acted. They beat him, bound him, and dragged him to a stone cell without trial. The charge was treason. No explanation. No opportunity to speak. He realized, in the quiet between pain and fever, that someone had been watching longer than he'd known. Someone who understood that love could be weaponized. His heart screamed for Elira, but there was no voice left in him strong enough to call out. Elira was gone. Married off in a distant land, her face a royal mask worn for politics. The foreign prince was courteous, cold, and calculating. She played her role with practiced grace, but the weight inside her never lifted. She spoke less, smiled rarely. Her attendants whispered that she was touched by sorrow. The truth was more brutal. She felt abandoned, discarded by the one person who had sworn to love her beyond titles, beyond bloodlines. She told herself he'd chosen loyalty, that the knight had bowed to duty in the end. Selim, chained to a damp wall, counted days in scratches. His mind conjured her voice at night, the sound of her breath near his. But the memory faded. Faces faded. Only the ache remained. When news finally reached him, smuggled in by a sympathetic guard, that Elira had wed, something in him broke. He laughed once. Then never again. Betrayal has many faces. To Selim, it wore the mask of silence. Of a love not fought for. To Elira, it came in the form of absence. A promise not kept. Each believed the other had walked away. Neither knew the truth. And in that chasm of misunderstanding, a fire burned out. Quiet. Irreversible. The war resumed. The kingdoms remained fractured. But neither of them returned to the field. She remained a queen by title, a prisoner by choice. He became a ghost behind stone, waiting for a freedom that wouldn't come. Letters stopped. The world moved on. Only the memory lingered, sharp, unfinished, and cruel. Neither of them said goodbye. Neither ever got the chance. And in the stillness that followed, both wondered, if they'd just spoken one truth sooner, could everything have been different? The answer, like the letters they once wrote, was lost to time. Years passed, quiet and unforgiving. Elira ruled with grace sharpened by sorrow. Her husband respected her position but never sought her heart. Their conversations were political, their dinners ceremonial. At night, she stood at her window and imagined mountains, not ballrooms. She never spoke of Selim, but he was always there in the silence between meetings, in the way she never let anyone too close. The token he gave her remained hidden in a locked drawer, untouched but never forgotten. Selim walked free, eventually. A guard with a conscience released him under cover of darkness. He emerged thinner, quieter, changed. His name was no longer spoken in court. Branded a traitor, he disappeared into the borders between kingdoms, offering his sword to causes with no banners. He never explained why he refused gold, why he never stayed. His eyes told enough. He'd left everything that mattered behind a stone wall and a locked gate. They never wrote again. Never reached for one another. Life had sealed off that chapter with cruel finality. Yet neither of them healed. Love, unfinished, leaves wounds that do not close. People spoke of Elira's wisdom, of her strength, but she knew it was built on hollow ground. A queen without joy. Her heart had been claimed once, completely, and never returned. Selim heard whispers on the wind. Rumors of her rule, of her poise. He never sought her out. Pride and pain held him back. She, too, stayed silent. But neither moved on. No new lovers. No second chances. Just echoes. Always echoes. And then, without intention or plan, they met again. A diplomatic tour brought her to a neutral province. He was there, helping rebuild a burned village. Their eyes met across a field. Neither expected the moment. Neither smiled. No words passed. But in the space between glances, years collapsed. He saw the same storm-grey eyes. She saw the same steadiness, now worn by time. She moved on, as she always did. He turned away. That night, she dreamed of a garden with wildflowers and rain. Before returning to her kingdom, she made a detour alone. She visited the place where they once met, the garden now overgrown and forgotten. She walked slowly, remembering every whisper, every vow. In the center, where they first stood too close, she found a single flower still growing, weathered but alive. She knelt, placed the token beside it, and whispered one word, enough. She didn't cry. He didn't return. But something within both of them finally exhaled. Not closure. Not forgiveness. Just peace. Betrayal had taken their future. Silence had stolen their chance. But memory, though painful, had preserved something real. And in that, they both remained unchanged and eternal.